All right, and welcome back to another Do It Wrong Yourself video. In this video, we're going to be tackling installation of LVP vinyl planking that's really common and popular in kitchens, entryways, bathrooms, and things like that. It's an alternative to wood flooring, and it's actually a little bit more durable than wood flooring in cases because it's water resistant. Now, you'll want to check down on the link in the description, as I'll have lots of little jump codes to the various sections in this video. We cover tips on laying out your floor, tips on installing, going inside of a bathroom, entryways around kitchen cabinetry, seamless joints, entryways, exitways, and then just some general installation tips along the way as well. Also, there'll be a link to a few of the basic tools. You can buy these simple kits to get you with the basic tools you'll need to get started on the project. So I hope you learn a thing or two in the video. Please comment down in the comment section if you have any of your own tips, your own tricks, and don't forget to like and subscribe. That really helps me out on this channel to be able to put out more videos like this. Right, now I've got a little demonstration here set up digitally to help you visualize which direction you should lay your tiles, whether they want to go vertical or whether they want to go horizontal. And then also a tip or two on where you should start as far as which wall or which edge you should start against and then move away from there. Now in this little sample, this actually mimics the layout that I have in the home that I just barely did these tiles in. Down here in the bottom here, this is actually the entryway, and the door to the home is right here at the bottom. So when you move in the home, when you open the door and walk in, you actually travel in this direction. So I would normally lay the tiles alongside that direction. So the way this little entryway is laid up, you can see these tiles obviously aren't to scale, but I would lay the tiles this way, running long ways. So if you have a square, you can really run them either direction, but personal preference for me is to run them in the direction that you enter or flow into the room. So in my entryway, I ran the tiles this way, and in my bathroom, pantry, and kitchen, I ran them all the opposite way. And that works for my home because the two rooms are completely disjointed. They're not connected. Okay, so I've actually got my main family room is right in this big area right here. And this is all carpet for me right now, and I wanted to keep it carpet. So if I were to do this where I had this also laminate in conjunction with the kitchen, I would probably run them all this way. So one of the general rules of thumb is find the longest wall in your home. So if this is the longest wall over here, run all the tiles along that wall. So in other words, you would run them in this direction right here. Okay, and then you would continue along. And because this would be one seamless room, you don't ever want to have half the room running like this and then have this butt joint to where the other half start running like this. So you want to create, the same pattern flowing throughout. Now the next tip I'm going to show you is where to start. This is probably one of the most difficult things is when you're laying out your room, where do I start laying these tiles from? Because there's a lot of gotchas in here, especially if you're working around kitchen cabinetry and things like that, stoves, ovens, dishwashers, and other things like that. So let me show you a tip on this. Okay, so let's just focus in here on my kitchen. So this right here is the kitchen area, this right here is the pantry area, and then this is a half bath. So this is the direction that I ended up running the tiles in all of the rooms is the way you're seeing them here. Now, in my case, I wanted the doorway that joins the pantry and the kitchen to be seamless. So I wanted the tiles just to continue through here as if it was a natural seam. Now, I could start from this top edge up here and, start laying my tiles this way, get to this point, and then come across this way one big row, and then keep coming down this way. But the problem with this is, and then, kind of transition in here, then come through the pantry. Then I have to go backwards all the way in through here. So then I have to run backwards, 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 backwards. It's not a huge deal because it's not a very large area, but that was what I would have to do. Now, instead of doing that, I opted to start in the pantry. And the reason being because it gives me the least amount of backwards flow. So I start in the pantry and I come here, 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 and I run all the way. And then I do a full tile here, and then I run all the way up over here, and this is where my fridge is right now, all the way against this cabinet. Okay, so what I do is I run tiles all the way, all the way, all the way, all the way, and then what I did in order to move the fridge is I just moved the fridge up to this point right here, ran my tiles, and then once my tiles pass that area, I just pushed the fridge back on top. So that's really easy. You don't have to move it clear out of the road, right? And then once it was right here, then I just go ahead and continue on. If you're going to be moving your fridge over the tiles, make sure to get a little scrap piece and put it in front of the wheels so you don't snap off those edges when you roll it on and off. So what this allows me to do then is I can keep working all the way across a full row right here. And then you can see as I'm pushing forward, it's just full rows. So I'm doing all these full rows, and then I come over here, And then then I'm still working forward. I do this area right here. I go underneath the dishwasher just a little bit. I'll show you in the tips here in a second. I don't do the full dishwasher. And then I finish off this very, very last and then run all the way up to the edge of the wall. Then the only backwards area I have to do is underneath the stove right here. So then I just do a few strips right here, little easy ones underneath the stove, and I'm done. So it really all depends on your room layout and how the flow sort of ends up and which cabinets you have. But that's kind of my method and school of thought on which direction to start running the tiles as well. All right, the other tip is make sure that you don't end up with a little teeny tiny sliver on one edge of your room. This is especially helpful if you're doing long hallways. So for example here, you can see in this little setup I have here, if my tiles were like this and I started with a full piece over against this edge and I ran them all the way, I would be left with this little teeny tiny sliver on the opposite end. And you can see that the door is right here, so we come into the home this way. Now this area is almost an exact square. So here you can run your tiles this way or this way. And kind of the general thought, or what I like, is that you want your tiles running lengthwise as you enter the room. So in this case, what I would do instead is I would split the difference. So instead I would sort of center the tiles like so that that first row is cut off a little bit and then that last row is cut off a bit. And this looks a lot better than as opposed to having a little strip. Also with little teeny tiny strips, sometimes they don't snap in as good. They can kind of come loose. So you want to make sure you have at least a full half of the board if you're able to on either side when your math doesn't quite work out. And here you can see this is the entryway all completed. Now before you get started, you'll need to take all of the planks you've purchased and bring them inside of your home to the same room temperature and let them acclimate for at least 24 hours before you get started. Also remember to buy at least 5 to 15% more square footage than the area you're covering to allow for errors and non-usable rip or end cuts on your various pieces. All right, so I just want to quickly cover a couple of the basic tools you're going to need in order to lay down your vinyl planking. Now, the tools are very basic and you can get away with manual tools or some of these automatic tools for doing this. Now, first, it's just some basic tape. You're going to be using this tape to tape up your spacers so that as you set in your vinyl planks, they have to maintain an expansion gap away from all edges. So the tape will just help you kind of tape in some of those spacers along the wall. You're going to need a sharp new X-Acto knife with some new blades. This vinyl planking here allows you to cut and snap it. So you actually will score across this and you can just snap that right in half as you're laying down your planks for the varying sizes that you'll need. For any of the odd cuts that aren't straight cuts, you'll want to just get a little handsaw or maybe a simple jigsaw in order to cut around maybe a little pattern around a door jamb or something like that. You'll also need a rubber mallet. Now the rubber mallet is basically used when you lay down two planks together. Once I mate this up with the second plank, you'll just simply tap along here to make sure that seam gets nice and level. Now, this little tool right here, I highly recommend. This is called an oscillating saw. And what happens here is there's a little attachment that goes on the front that just wiggles back and forth. And this is really helpful for cutting around the door jambs. So when you have an area like this where you're cutting around the door, you can just easily cut out that little jamb right there, and then this little planking will slide right underneath and give you a nice clean finish. Now, this tool right here you're gonna want, this is going to be a little crowbar, and this is basically for prying off the kickboard here, the floorboard. Now, if you're laying your floor like me, where I'm laying on top of an existing floor, we have to remove all these floorboards. So you want a pry bar like this because you actually have to be fairly careful when you remove this so you don't damage the drywall. After you get this floorboard off, there'll be a lot of caulking left over on the wall. So you can just come through here and scrape off that caulking like so, and then also on your subfloor. So you can just go through and make sure you have a nice, even, smooth surface. If you're doing this on concrete or on a wood subfloor, you of course need to make sure that's level, and make sure it's level according to the manufacturing specs. But if you don't have a level floor, you'll need to buy some of the leveling material and spread that around first to get a nice smooth surface before you lay down the vinyl planks. A speed square like this way you can set this right against your board, get your cutting edge, and you can just score right along there and be able to snap your boards easier, make a pencil line. And then also a chalk line if you have one of these. You can also just draw marks on the floor as well, but this is kind of helpful as you're going. You'll want to strike a couple of marks so you have a gauge of where your level is as you're going. And then just a couple little cheap pair of knee pads if you're going to be doing a large area. All right, so here on the molding, which I was calling the floorboards, we need to just cut through the caulking strip. So there's a caulking strip right in the back edge. So we're just gonna come all the way down to this end. So if you get down in here and you pry really hard, you'll actually break right inside of the drywall. You'll crush in a hole. So you gotta be really careful to not only not damage the drywall, but these molding strips are pretty flimsy as well, and sometimes they can break. So you typically just wanna go to a corner. So I'm gonna start right here, and I'm just gonna lightly get my edge in here. Now, typically there's studs that run along here, so there's a little bit harder backing back here. Right in the middle, it's hollow. Right here, you can hear it's solid, so it's easier to pry against something solid, less likely you'll damage anything. So just a couple taps, and once you just get that little bit, you just pry really lightly there. You can see that starting to break away already. Okay, so here you can see one of the nails. Now again, you can do this with pliers, or you can even do this with a little crowbar. You just come in here and you just kind of give this a bend, and you just twist, and you can see that pops right out. There's the little nail, and then that makes sure there's nothing on the front, so it's nice and smooth on the front so you can staple back through. All right, for some of those nails that get stuck in the wall, if you try to pull those out, you can sometimes damage the drywall. So if you come in here with a pair of vice grips and you just clamp on those like this, you just get your little pry bar back here to provide some support. And all you have to do is just roll. So I just am rolling this simply out, and notice how that just pops straight out without any damage. You can also do that on the back of these. You can just click and roll these out of the back as well. After you remove your molding, go ahead and just write a little label on the back so you know where they belong when you put them back. All right, so there's a couple of ways you can install this. You can, of course, leave the molding on the wall and keep your expansion gap right here and install all your vinyl planks like this, but then you would need to get like a piece of quarter round to kind of tack in right there on the bottom to cover up the expansion gap. So what I'm doing instead, right, I've removed the molding. This is gonna slide up, you know, keeping your expansion gap there, and then the molding just goes right down on top, and that gives a nice finished edge. Now the problem is that when we come into a door jamb like this, I want the plank here to go under the jamb as well. So that's where this little saw comes, and these little saws are only like $13. It's well worth it. So at Harbor Freight is where I picked that up. So anyway, what we're gonna do is you can just get a plank and slide it over here tight, and that'll give you the exact height that you need to cut out of the molding here. So what you do is you just get your saw, place it like this, and then just saw out a little piece like that. That way this will slide right underneath there. Okay, so once you saw that out like that, you can see that this is gonna slide under there really nice, and we maintain our expansion gap, and then that'll all tie in there like that, and we just run a little. Now, typically you start with a full-length piece, and you start in the left front corner of your longest wall. So this one's gonna go kind of right up into here, and you wanna make sure that the little, you can see the gray part facing out this way, and also on this corner. And you work left to right. So what you do is you just go ahead and lay down your entire first row and snap those all the way in. And once you get about 3 or so rows, then you can put in your spacers here on the back and tap it against. These kind of tend to move around a little bit because they're floating, so you don't need to worry about getting your spacers until you get a couple of rows in. Now, the way these guys work is you simply just set them on top like this, and you angle them at a little about 45 degrees, like so, and then you just set them down. And you can see that just goes in perfectly smooth. And you can get your mallet, tap, tap. If you need to, you can get a little block of wood like this, set up here, and then tap. I've just drawn a little black line on both sides, so I know this is gonna be my hitting end, this will be my crisp end. Just set it up there and tap that against that. They do also sell little commercial blocks that have little grooves. So depending on the type of vinyl you have, the little tongue and groove system is slightly different. They're all patented. Now in my case, I'm actually not going to be starting with a full piece. I'm going to be taking this out to my table saw and cutting this roughly in half. And the reason is that when I measured my room here from left to right, I don't want to end up with a really thin piece against one wall. So I've kind of got, this is the pantry area, and I'm going to be continuing this in all the way to the kitchen. So I've sort of measured from one end of my wall all the way into my kitchen on the other end of the wall. and my numbers don't allow me to start with a full plank because that would just leave me a little teeny about an inch piece left over, which you cannot do. You have to have roughly about a half of this if you can get away with that. So in order to alleviate that, I've got to rip my first piece in half and then start, and then I'll have to rip the other end. All right, now when you're cutting out your end pieces, you don't have to mark or measure or do anything like that. What you can do is you just slide this down to where you maintain your expansion gap. You can see this board would normally fit in like this. And then what you do is you flip it over. See if I can do this one-handed. So you reverse it, right? So I took that board like this and I flipped it all the way over like that, okay? And then I'm just gonna flip it over this way. So these two end edges, you should have your two grooves like that. And then you slide that down all the way till you get your expansion gap, like so. And then all you're gonna do is you just kind of barely peek this over, and right there is where you're gonna make your cut. So you'll see me on the slow motion or on the time lapse. What I do is I just get my sharp edge and I just go right to there. And then you just simply score that and then snap it, flip it around, and it fits right in. So you don't have to measure, you don't have to mark anything. So we score all the way across this. And if you flip it over and you pull, see how it just snaps like that? And then you can just cut through the little vacuum like so, and you get a nice, perfectly clean snap. And so then this one, of course, is gonna fit right into this one. Lay down, and you've got your first row. So that's kind of the process. Now we're just gonna walk over here and do the second row. Make sure the ends are lined up and snap that down. Now I'm not gonna start really hammering and butting these up until I get a couple of rows in here. And then you just kind of continue your way down. Now the only thing you have to watch out for is when you are going along here, you want to make sure you never get the same board. The pattern repeats itself every I don't know, 6 or 7 boards. So you don't want to have the same pattern next to each other or next to each other on the same row. So this pattern maybe you want over there, and this pattern, you know, somewhere else. So always kind of double check as you're going, make sure you're not repeating the pattern next to each other in your rows. Now, the only other tip as you're installing here is you want to make sure that you don't, what's called an H pattern. So I don't want to continue this one all the way, cut off a little piece, and then start with that one. Otherwise, they'll have the exact same pattern. It'll be seam, 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 seam. It'll be this little H all the way through. And you don't want to do that. And you also want to avoid what's known as stair stepping. So I don't want to cut off like 8 inches here and then have my seams be the exact same. So seam, seam, seam. So it's like a big diagonal stair step of seams. You want the pattern, meaning these seams right here, these horizontal seams, to be as random as possible. So here's that stair stepping pattern you want to avoid, and then here's the H pattern look that you want to avoid. Remember, it's always the first board you cut that determines the pattern, so always vary that first board. Here you can see it's just me working through the pantry, the final finished shot. All right, so once you've got your baseboards all tacked in and you've gone ahead and painted over your little nail holes, it's time to add some caulking. Now, it's a lot easier to do with this with a little caulking gun like this because you can apply constant pressure. I've got this little tube here of leftover, so I'm gonna be using this up. But essentially, you just run a little bead all the way along the seam right here. Also, don't forget to do these little seams and then your corner seams as well. If you have a little spot like this, you can see right here where those little air bubbles came out. Just lick your finger and just run like that. You can just smooth all those out really easy and create a nice smooth seam. So there's basically 2 ways you can install these Uni-Click systems. I found one method much easier than the other. So method 1 is you come in here and you set this, so you lift it up sort of at a 45-degree angle like this, and then you drop it, and then you click from that end and try to get these to seat down in this way. But you can see this actually sits up kind of on a little bit of an angle. So that's method 1. I found it doesn't really work as well. You'll of course want to get close like that. Method 2 works a lot better. In method 2, you basically do this way first. So what you do is you come in, you get really close right here at the edge, and you can see if you come in here, see how this seam is really tight and there's a little gap right there. I don't know if you can see that on the camera. But in order to fix that, you have to lift this board up. So once I lift this board a little bit, notice how that gap just went seamless all the way down. So that's the method I like to do. You just lift a little bit here so you get a nice snug fit, then you drop it, and then you drop both boards. Now you'll notice with this system, you know when they're locked in place because there won't be any give in the floor. So watch what happens here when I tap. So now that I got these two, I'll tap this one back and I'll tap this one a bit. Now I want you to come over here to this corner and notice how this one's floating. See how it's not flat on the floor? That means it's not locked in place. It will lay perfectly flat once it's locked in place. So watch now, I'll come down here again, and I'm just gonna start at the bottom and click all the way up and then tap back this way, and you'll notice that down in this end, this corner will sort of flatten out. See this little gap right there, that teeny tiny seam? That's what's keeping this thing up. So once you get those locked, this whole tile will drop. And see how it just dropped right then? That is tight there, that seam is tight down there. And now look at this corner. Notice how there's no give at all. It's all the way flat. So you know you've got it locked into place when the tile lays flat on the floor and you have a tight seam. All right, so the last piece here is the transition through the doorway. And there's a couple of ways you can do this, but the way I've opted to do it is I've cut a shorter piece here, and then I'm actually gonna create a little notch right here. So I want a full section to slide underneath the door. And the reason why I'm doing that, so you can see I've just landed up here and I've just kind of traced here where the molding is there for the door jamb, and then the same thing here on the other side. So I'll end up cutting out this strip and then cutting out this strip. And then what I'm gonna do is that's gonna allow me to just slide it underneath like that, all the way in. And then I'll open the door and then click it back here. And then I'm actually gonna install this piece next. So I'll kind of install it backwards. So I'll just come down to this end and then pound from this end to get this to click in. And then I'll install the last piece normally. So that way I have a seamless piece going through, and then I'll repeat the process on the other side of the door as well. Okay, so now we're on the back side of this door. And so what I've done is I've already ripped down here the first little row. You can see I ripped that down. And that I had to make that skinnier because it's gonna be a full piece right here. So to know the width of this, I just got a piece of scrap here and laid it in, and then just measured the distance, you know, between my gap right over here to the edge. So these are gonna join up nicely. So that's how I got that. And then once I knew that measurement, I went ahead and ripped down a row, and now I'm gonna do the same thing I did before. So now I've got a full piece here, and we're gonna take the full piece and just set it in the slot like so. And then I'm just gonna take my pencil, make my little mark here, and then make my little mark here. And then I can cut off the same amount here. So I'll notch that out, cut that out, and then cut out that little piece down there as well. And then this whole entire thing will just slide underneath the door jamb all the way up to here and click into here. And you can't really lift, right? Because it's gonna be underneath the door jamb. So you'll have to just kind of give it a little bit extra motivation with tapping there to get it to lock into place. So you can see here's now that cutout. It's definitely a little bit of a funny shaped piece, but it goes in there really nice. So what I'm actually gonna do is I'm actually gonna hook this together, and then I'm gonna slide the whole entire row up underneath. But you can see, I'll just show you here as I slide this up in. You can see how it's gonna fit in there. Nice. And it's all underneath that cutout that we did earlier. Note here in the time lapse, I've actually only pulled the fridge forward just enough to do behind it, and then I just push it back right over on the top once I move past that area. All right, so you can see here, now I'm coming back and I'm wrapping now in front of this first cabinet. This is where my stove was, and that's where it's going to end. So going under a stove is fairly straightforward here. So normally, right, you start from left to right, but since we came out that door, we kind of worked our way from left to right here. And then we're gonna put this piece in, which fits right in that slot, and then I'll kind of go backwards right there, and then just backwards up into the stove. So that's kind of the process here, and we'll keep going. Okay, so whenever you come to a transition, for example, we're gonna be going here from our new LVP onto carpet. We're gonna be getting new carpet. So you just get a pro bar here, and you can just, you know, rip out the old transition. And you have a couple of different options when it comes to how you do the new transition. So they make a thing called a T-mold, which is a little mold which kind of overlaps here and then overlaps the carpet. There's a couple of different options. I don't like the T-mold because it kind of leaves a big old lip. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna run all of my vinyl flooring and have a nice perfect straight edge along this line. And then I'm gonna have the carpet guys just come and tuck that right in. So what they'll do is they'll just come and they'll just butt that up. Maybe they might have to roll the carpet over. So it's just gonna be carpet right into the flooring. Now this is the exact same area now with the finished transition up to the carpet. Again, you have lots of options, so it's up to you there. You'll notice in these shots, all the way against the far edge, I have a little white piece of wood, and that's actually screwed down to the floor, which allows me to lay these planks and then tap them back from the right side, hit up against that edge to give me a nice, perfect flat edge, which is where my new carpet butts up against. So just continue working forward here until I run up against the last row in the dishwasher. So you can see here I'm coming into this kitchen cutout here. And sometimes when you're working in a small area like this, it's easier for me to just link several pieces together. So I've linked those two right there, and then I've linked those two right there. And then I'll just lift up and put the whole row in and tack it from the back. Right, so here I'm at the dishwasher. Now, some people will actually remove the entire dishwasher. However, a lot of professionals will actually never even remove these when they're installing floor, because anytime you remove and move a dishwasher, you have more of a chance of it leaking. So a lot of people just leave it in place, and you can see what I've done here is I've just cut a little board that's notched out, and it's just gonna slide under like that. So it's just gonna go under 2 inches. And most dishwasher, when you remove the front plate, have these adjustable legs. So I'm just gonna spin this leg up the same width as the board over here, and then do the same thing on the other side. And then my little piece is just gonna slide right underneath there so that it'll go under 2 or 3 inches, completely invisible. I don't have to remove the dishwasher and worry about that. So you can see I just added a couple of little pieces of scrap as spacers right here and lifted the leveling leg all the way up. And then we'll slide that under, put the legs back down, and remove the scrap from underneath there. Now they sell these little hammering blocks, which are helpful right when you get to the end of a little piece. You can hook it in there and then tap on it this way. The ones they sell I found are a little bit small, so I was actually able to just, I had some little iron, and I just heated this up with a blowtorch and just bent a couple curves really quick on a vise. And it's much longer, that way it's actually kind of handy for getting underneath here, where I need to tap back to fill in that last seam. So anyway, if you have these little tapping blocks you can buy, those are helpful for these jobs as well. Now, when you're doing inside of a bathroom, you do need to remove the toilet. So I'm not going to go over all the details on how to remove a toilet. It's actually fairly simple. You just need to undo the 2 screws and pop it off. And typically there's a wax ring that sits right here. So you need to get some scrapers and peel out that old wax ring. And then get yourself a nice sharp X-Acto knife or something, because you do want to get rid of all of the old caulking like this, because you'll have to re-caulk when you set the toilet back down on top. What I recommend is just, moving up your tiles until you get right here. And to make it easy on yourself, instead of trying to do a full tile over the top of the hole and drilling out a hole in the middle, make a joint hit right in the middle of this opening here. That way you have one tile that comes out right here, and then another tile that kind of comes out this way. And it's really easy to cut the ends of those tiles instead of trying to deal with a hole in the middle. Now, the one thing to remember here is, depending on the height of the flooring you add, your toilet is going to be sitting up a little bit higher, which means the standard thickness wax ring, if you're going with a wax ring, may not work. So just depending on your thickness, you may need to go with an extra thick so that your wax is a little bit higher, because your toilet's going to be sitting higher, and you want to make sure that gap is fully covered. So again, that's something you're going to have to check out. Okay, so the way my board ended up, I'm actually not going to cut it this way because my splice is going to kind of be right here. So I'm going to cut a half circle out this way, and I'll have to do the opposite on the other board. So what I've done here is I've just measured the outside to outside. That's 6 inches from here to here. So the midway point is 3 inches. And then I know that from right here to the beginning is 1.5 inches. So from this edge to right here has to be 1.5 inches. So then I measured 3 overs over here. So this is going to be the very center of the hole. So now all I'm going to do is just grab a piece of string here and hold this in the middle. And then I'll hold this down here on my pencil mark. So you can see here's what it looks like after I got that all finished and laid down. So there's the toilet recaulked. And then also over here, same thing. I had to remove the sink, lay my tiles, and then set that little pedestal for the sink back on top as well. So that's what it kind of looks like when it's all done with everything put back on top. Okay, so I'm gonna be adding a new transition piece because you can see that this is gonna be coming in this way. I'm gonna be running my tiles this way. So I need to get rid of the old one. So you can just kind of pull this up. You can see it's either got glue or staples or screws, but you'll need to rip out the old transition. Okay, so I've applied some construction adhesive underneath here and then underneath the linoleum where I ripped out the old one. And this is gonna be my new piece. So you can either just screw down into this, or I'm just gonna do some little staples with my staple gun. Tack that down, and then all of your boards are gonna slide up right into that slot, and you'll be able to maintain your expansion gap. Okay, so you can see here, what I'm gonna do is on this first piece here, I'm gonna tap it from this end so it slides up underneath my edge right here. So we'll go pretty slow here. And that's about it. So as long as you clear underneath there, you want to maybe go about halfway. So you have a little bit of room in there for your expansion. You gotta go another little tap or two. You can kind of see right there, but that's it. So now that'll clear under there and you have a nice clean edge. All right, for the edge on the back double doors here. So I've done the same thing as the front door. I've removed that little strip of linoleum. And then because my planks are running this way, I can't tap them in. So what I've got to do here is I've actually just slid this onto this little guy, and it's kind of set right where it needs to be. There's two pieces there. And then I'm just gonna lay down a piece of glue underneath the linoleum and then just right on top there. And then what I'm gonna do, because these also have to go into the molding, I'm just gonna take this, slide it all the way in place, and then pull it back to get that seam, and then this will be kind of free floating. Then I can tap that blue thing, because I want, or the black piece, I want the black piece flush up against right here, and then it should kind of sit in there and look like that. So that's how I'm doing this back door. All right, the last piece is in. So you can see there, it's all finished now. I slid it under and then just got my primer back there and tapped it back to fill the seam. And then the last little thing I'm gonna do, I don't know if you can see this on camera, but there is a teeny tiny gap right here. And I want that gap to be underneath here. Right now this board is flush up against the edge because I was pounding back. So I'm just gonna get my block like this, give a few taps just to push this back against the white piece right here. That'll leave my expansion gap right in the middle of this, and I am good to go. Right, so here's all the little pieces of trim that I'm gonna be putting around the gaps around the cabinets. You can see this stuff is actually called shoe molding. Kind of has a profile that looks like that. And these are just pine boards, and I've just got some regular old wood stain here, and I've stained them all a color that matches my cabinets. I wanted to do this instead of matching the floor. I think it looks a little bit nicer, so I'll show you what that looks like when I go start tacking these in. So once I stained them, I just sprayed a little bit of that coating here. I did a semi-gloss, which kind of also matches my cabinets to kind of protect these, water protect them, and give them a little bit of hardening as well. All right, so I mentioned I stained these to match my cabinets. A lot of people actually get and match with the actual floor, but I like to look better to where these match up with the cabinets. So you can see there's the expansion gap. I've just cut little 45s out of here, and then that's just gonna match right in there. And then I just go ahead and just tack those in with little nails, just like you do with your molding. And that's how you finish around your cabinets if you're not able to go underneath. So I hope you learn a thing or two in the video. Please comment down in the comment section if you have any of your own tips, your own tricks. And don't forget to like and subscribe. That really helps me out on this channel to be able to put out more videos like this.